Now we're going to start to work with 3D Autocad, and in 3D Autocad what we're going to do is we're going to open up what is AutoCAD's 3D template. Now the one thing to consider is that when we start to work with using 3D in AutoCAD, it's no different space than what we've been using already. Okay, so keep that one in mind. It's not special, it's not new, it's not different. It is exactly the same type of model space, exactly the same type of paper spaces we've been working with. The only reason why I'm going to open up a 3D template is that it starts off with a different visual style, and we'll get into that in just a second. But you'll see that it'll start to introduce what 3D is going to look like in AutoCAD. So I'm going to go up to my new, okay, or create a new drawing icon. And as I said, what it's going to do is going to pop me into the templates. Okay, so this is going to recall us back to the templates that we've been using. And I'm going to select ACAD 3D as my template. So I'm going to open that up, and AutoCAD is going to open a new file using that template. And so you'll see that what happens here with opening that up is that we're not looking straight up and down like we have been with using 2D and with using the ACAD drawing template. Now what it does is it automatically brings us at an angle, looking down into the space at an angle. You'll see that we know that we're in 3D in that we have our XY, but we also have our Z that's located with this blue axis, and that's the axis that gives us that third dimension. Okay, that's our vertical dimension. Now with this, you'll see that like the other ACAD template, it doesn't give us our units, okay, or it's already in the polar decimal units. So I'm going to type in units, again, you know, like we have been doing in this class, and I'm going to change them to architectural, and I'm going to hit OK. And you'll see that now they're in feet and inches. And as I said, this is just another way of viewing the two-dimensional file that we've been working with. If I go to all of my tools, okay, you'll see that my tools are still here. I can work with two-dimensional tools in AutoCAD, the ones that we have been working with so far, and I'm going to start to introduce how to work with three-dimensional tools in AutoCAD. Before we get into that, what I want to show you, just to emphasize that this is the same space as our two-dimensional AutoCAD, is that when I go to View, okay, I'm going to go into my visual styles, and you'll see that this is a realistic visual style. When we're working with 2D AutoCAD, what happens is that this visual style is actually, if I expand this list, the 2D wireframe. Okay, so you'll notice that when I do switch it, this probably looks a little bit more familiar, and that's because this is the visual style that comes in with that two-dimensional template. Okay, with this template, all it is just changing it to realistic, and that changes the look of the coordinates. And so, you know, when you start to get into working with 3D in AutoCAD, okay, you might stick with a realistic, or you might stick with a conceptual, or any of those types of visual styles, okay, and all it does is it changes the look of what shows on your screen until we start to print, and we'll get into that a little bit later on. But also keep in mind that, you know, if you're working with a really large file and it's starting to get bogged down a little bit, and you're turning your layers off and it's just not doing the best, you can actually change the visual style back to 2D wireframe, and that will get it working a little bit faster. So the visual styles are not only a way of, you know, showing how your objects look, you know, in 2D and 3D space, but also it works with processing, okay, and how AutoCAD, you know, easily or doesn't easily process the information. In navigating around AutoCAD in 3D, we can do the same things that we have been doing with 2D. So the zoom works the same way. If I hold down my mouse, I can pan around my drawing. If I scroll up, I can zoom in. If I scroll down, I can zoom out. So the same exact thing that we've been working with, we can do in the three-dimensional, well, I'm not even going to say the three-dimensional space in AutoCAD, but we can do the same thing while working with 3D objects, because the reason why I don't want to say that it is a 3D AutoCAD is that it's no different. Okay, and I don't want you to get the impression that it is different, because it's the same model space that we've been working with throughout. Now, before, you may have noticed that, of course, with our AutoCAD drawings, what comes in is this view cube. And with working with two-dimensional objects in AutoCAD, we don't need this as much as we do now with three-dimensional AutoCAD. Because what we've been using before with two-dimensional drawing in AutoCAD is that we've been basically just working with, as I said, the 2D wireframe visual style, and we've been working with the top view. Okay, now what we need to do is we need to start to get a little bit familiar with this, because this can help us to navigate around this space. It's not my preferred way of navigating around the space, but you'll see that it is very helpful in that I can switch to certain views, so front and right and back, so on and so forth, left. And then when I click on the top arrow, that'll bring me to the top view. So that's actually the view that we've been working with in doing 2D drafting in AutoCAD. And you'll see that when we get to that, our north, south, east, and west, okay, AutoCAD keeps track of that, especially when we start to do lighting studies, which you can do in AutoCAD, and which we will be doing, or at least introducing you to lighting in AutoCAD when we start to render. But it also has this north, south, east, and west, and when we click on any of those views, that might start to skew our drawing a bit. So if you look in the upper right, it has these two arrows that allow us to actually rotate where our north is and where our south is, so on and so forth. So that's the way that we use the view cube for this. What we can also do is we can use the orbit tools that will help us to orbit around the space. Now if I go to view, you'll see that under navigate 2D, okay, it has my pan, it has my previous view, and it also has not only my zoom to extents, okay, but it also has my orbit, okay. And if I click on that, what it does is it turns my mouse into basically this orbiter. So I can click and I can rotate, and I can rotate around my three-dimensional space. So there's the orbit, and then when I expand this, you'll see that there's also a free orbit, okay. And what this does is if you click and drag, okay, it essentially allows us to do the same thing, okay, as the regular orbit. But when I enter, you'll see that there's a circle with little circles. If I enter these circles, it constrains my orbit in specific axes. Okay, if you notice that my cursor has the two orbits around it, okay, the two little arrows, that means that that's just a regular orbit. If it changes, okay, you'll see when I mouse over that, it only has one arrow. It constrains it to specific axes about which to rotate the model. Okay, then there's the continuous orbit, and this one always tends to make me a little ill, because basically what happens is that when you click on your orbit and you move around and then you let go, okay, it starts to rotate on its own. Okay, and you can do this, and all I'm doing is clicking and dragging, and you can see that you can do it at various speeds, but sometimes it starts to get really fast. Okay, and then you'll see that it starts to get a little dizzying. Okay, so for that, what I do is I just click out of it, do my orbit, my regular orbit, and I try not to use that too much because I don't want to, get sick while I'm drafting with AutoCAD. But what I find the fastest thing to do is to hold down Shift and my scroll button, and that does the same thing. And I find that to be the easiest thing than going up and having to go to this view every time that I need to orbit. And again, all it is holding down Shift, holding down my scroll button, and rotating around that way. One other thing to note before we start to work with modeling in 3D is that our workspace setting is set to drafting and annotation. And if we go back to week 1, we talked about basically, this heading setting up the tools that are displayed in our ribbon system. And that's with this little cog icon, which you can find here and you can find in the lower right-hand corner. Now, if we expand this list, we'll see that there's not only drafting and annotation, but now there's 3D Basics and 3D Modeling and AutoCAD Classic, which we don't really have to worry about anymore. But that's basically for the old system and how AutoCAD used to look. So if anybody ever wants to go back to that, they can do that instead of working with the ribbon system. But what we want to do is for ease of use, okay, and again, this doesn't change any of the functionality of AutoCAD. All it does is it changes the tools that are most common now from two-dimensional into three-dimensional modeling, and it calls those up and sets the ribbon system with those. Okay, it doesn't do change any of the functionality, as I said, of it. It doesn't change the way that it's used. All it does is it changes the tools that are up here, because basically AutoCAD says, look, these are the ones that you're most likely going to be using during this process. So these are the ones that we separated out to be the most common, that we feel that would be used the most common when you work through this process. So we're going to be using 3D modeling tools in order to work with AutoCAD in 3D. So if I click on that, you'll see that it refreshes itself. And now you'll see that the what we had before changes to home, solid, surfaces. And so these are the commands and these are the tools that we'll need in order to start working with three-dimensional AutoCAD.